I thought I knew what loyalty looked like. I thought it was the woman sleeping next to me every night, the kid calling me dad from the back seat, the house we built together brick by brick. Then one Saturday afternoon, I walked into my own garage and found my wife pressed against the workbench, her ex-husband's hands on her waist, their foreheads touching like I didn't even exist. What I uncovered after that moment didn't just break my heart. It burned down everything I thought was real and forced me to rebuild from the ashes. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 44 years old, and I'm a high school football coach in Franklin, Tennessee, about 20 miles south of Nashville. I also teach American history to juniors and seniors at Westbrook High. It's not glamorous work. I drive a 10-year-old truck. I wear the same 3 pairs of khakis on rotation. But I love what I do. There's nothing like watching a 17-year-old kid who's been told he's worthless his whole life score his first touchdown and realize he matters. That's the kind of man I am. I show up. I stay. I do the work nobody sees. I met my wife Rachel 7 years ago at a parent-teacher conference. She had come in to discuss her son Caleb's grades, and she looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Dark circles under her eyes. Chipped nail polish. A stain on her blouse she hadn't noticed. But when she talked about Caleb, her whole face changed. She lit up like a stadium on game night. Caleb was 9 then, a scrawny kid with big brown eyes and a gap-toothed smile. His biological father, Derek Hollis, had left when Caleb was 4. Just packed a bag one morning, said he needed to find himself, and drove to Phoenix. For 5 years, Derek sent a birthday card every other year and called on Christmas if he remembered. Caleb stopped asking about him by the time he was 7. Rachel and I started dating that winter. She was cautious at first, and I understood why. A woman who's been abandoned once doesn't hand over her trust easily. But I was patient. I brought her coffee on Saturday mornings. I helped Caleb with his math homework even though I'm terrible at math. I fixed the leaky faucet in her apartment and didn't make a big deal about it. Slowly, she let me in. Caleb was the one who brought us together, really. The kid attached to me like a magnet. He'd never had a man around who stayed for dinner, who showed up to his school plays, who threw a football with him in the yard. The first time he called me Dad instead of Coach Marcus. Rachel cried in the kitchen for 10 minutes. I pretended I didn't hear it, but my eyes weren't dry either. We got married 3 years later at a small church off Main Street, nothing fancy. Rachel wore her mother's dress. Caleb was my best man. He stood up there next to me in a suit that was slightly too big for him, grinning like he'd won the lottery. After the ceremony, he tugged on my sleeve and said, "Does this mean you're stuck with us forever?" I told him that was exactly what it meant. We bought a 3-bedroom house on Maple Ridge Drive with a big backyard. Nothing extravagant, just a solid home in a decent neighborhood with good schools. We planted a vegetable garden. Rachel started working as a dental hygienist at a practice downtown. I coached football in the fall, taught history year-round, and spent my summers building a treehouse for Caleb that took 3 years to finish. We had Sunday dinners with my parents. Caleb joined the middle school basketball team. Rachel started talking about having another baby. Life was good. Ordinary and good. The kind of good you don't appreciate until someone takes it from you. The first sign of trouble came last September, right when football season kicked off. Rachel started getting texts late at night. She'd glance at her phone and her expression would shift, just slightly, like a cloud passing over the sun. When I asked who it was, she always had an answer ready. Her sister, a coworker, the dentist's office group chat. Then she started going out on Wednesday evenings. A new yoga class, she said. She bought new workout clothes, nice ones, the kind she'd never bothered with before. She started wearing perfume on yoga nights, which struck me as odd, but I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that trust means not questioning every little thing. In October, Rachel announced she was pregnant. She told me over dinner while Caleb was at basketball practice. She had tears in her eyes and a test in her hand, and I jumped out of my chair and held her so tight she laughed and told me she couldn't breathe. After 4 years of trying, it was finally happening. I called my mother that night, and she screamed so loud my father came running from the other room thinking something was wrong. But something was off. Rachel didn't want me at her first ultrasound appointment. She said it was just routine blood work and she'd be in and out. She got defensive when I suggested we tell our families. She wanted to wait, she said, until the second trimester. Until it was safe. I respected that. Looking back, I was so busy respecting her wishes that I ignored every alarm bell going off in my head. November was when things started cracking. I came home from a Friday night game, still buzzing from a 28-14 win, and found Rachel sitting in the dark living room. She said she had a headache, but her eyes were red, and there was a half-empty wine glass on the table. She was pregnant and drinking wine. When I pointed that out, she snapped at me, said it was one glass, said I was being controlling. We went to bed without speaking. Caleb noticed it too. He was 13 by then, old enough to read the room. One morning before school, he found me in the kitchen making his lunch. "Dad," he said quietly, "is Mom okay?" I told him she was just stressed from the pregnancy. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't buy it. "She's been acting weird," he said. "She keeps her phone face down now. She never used to do that. Kids see everything. We think we're protecting them by keeping things behind closed doors, but they hear the silence between the words. They feel the temperature change in a room when something's wrong." The Saturday, everything fell apart, started like any other. I had a morning meeting with my coaching staff at the school. We were planning for the state playoffs. I was supposed to be gone until noon, but the meeting ended early because our defensive coordinator's wife went into labor. I drove home feeling good, thinking I'd surprise Rachel and Caleb and maybe take them out for lunch. I pulled into the driveway and noticed an unfamiliar car parked on the street. A black Audi SUV with Arizona plates. Arizona. The word hit me like a linebacker. Derek was from Phoenix. I sat in my truck for a full minute, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Then I walked to the garage because the side door was open, and what I saw inside stopped me cold. Rachel was standing by the workbench, and Derek Hollis was standing in front of her, his hands on her hips, his face inches from hers. They were talking in low voices, intimate voices, the kind of voices that don't belong to people who are just discussing custody arrangements. They didn't hear me come in. I stood there for maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like 5 years. Then Rachel looked up and saw me. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. "Marcus," she said. I didn't say a word. I looked at Derek, this man I'd never met but had imagined 1,000 times. He was taller than I expected. Tan. Expensive watch. The kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He stepped back from Rachel slowly, casually, like I'd interrupted a conversation about the weather. "You must be Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard a lot about you." I stared at his hand like it was covered in something foul. Then I looked at Rachel. "Living room, now, both of you." I went inside and sat in my chair, the one by the window where I grade papers and watched Caleb shoot hoops in the driveway. Rachel and Derek followed. She sat on the couch. He stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, possessive and deliberate. "Someone start talking," I said. Rachel's eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal. "Marcus, it's not what it looks like." "Then tell me what it is." Derek cleared his throat. "Marcus, I reached out to Rachel a few months ago because I want to be part of Caleb's life again. I've gotten my act together. I have a real estate development company in Scottsdale. I'm doing well. I want to provide for my son." "Your son?" I repeated. "The son you abandoned when he was 4 years old." "People change. Some people don't. They just get better at pretending." Rachel jumped in. "Marcus, please. Derek has been helping us. He wants to contribute to Caleb's future. College, savings, opportunities we can't afford on our salaries." There it was, on our salaries. A high school teacher and a dental hygienist. She'd done the math, and I came up short. "How long?" I asked. "How long what? How long have you two been in contact? And don't lie to me, Rachel. I'm done with lies." She looked at Derek. He gave a slight nod, like he was granting her permission. That gesture alone told me everything I needed to know about the power dynamic between them. "Since June," she whispered. "June, 4 months before she told me about the pregnancy." My stomach turned to ice. "The yoga classes," I said. "The late-night texts. The Wednesday evenings." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. "And the baby," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is the baby mine?" Rachel started crying. Not the gentle, dignified tears of someone who's sorry. The ugly, panicked crying of someone whose entire construction of lies is collapsing floor by floor. "Marcus, please, let me explain. Answer the question." Derek stepped forward. "Marcus, I think we should all take a breath here. You don't get to tell me to breathe in my own house." I stood up, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in Derek's eyes. Not quite fear, but the recognition that he was dealing with someone who had nothing left to lose. You walked out on a 4-year-old boy. You disappeared for 9 years. And now you show up with a fancy car and a checkbook and think you can buy back what you threw away? I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to make things right. Then where were you when Caleb had pneumonia at age 6 and Rachel was working double shifts to pay the hospital bills? Where were you when he cried every Father's Day because the other kids had dads and he didn't? Where were you when I was the one teaching him to ride a bike, to tie his shoes, to stand up for himself? Derek's jaw tightened. I made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes. You didn't make mistakes. You made a choice, and now you're making another one. But this time you're destroying a family to do it. That's when I heard the creak on the stairs. Caleb was standing halfway up, his basketball shoes in his hand, frozen. His eyes were wide, moving between his mother, Derek, and me. Caleb, go back upstairs, Rachel said quickly. No. Caleb came down the rest of the stairs. He was looking at Derek with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Recognition mixed with something harder. I know who you are, he said. Derek smiled. It was the rehearsed smile of a salesman. Hey, buddy, I'm your dad. No, you're not. Caleb's voice was steady and clear. My dad is sitting in that chair. He pointed at me. You're just the guy who left. The words landed like a grenade in the room. Rachel reached for Caleb. Sweetheart, please. This is complicated. It's not complicated, Mom. You've been sneaking around. I'm not stupid. I hear you on the phone at night. I've seen his texts on your screen. I know what's going on. 13 years old, and he'd been carrying this weight alone. The thought made me sick with guilt that I hadn't seen it sooner. Rachel looked at me with desperation. Marcus, can we please talk about this privately? We're past private. Caleb's part of this family. He gets to hear the truth. I looked her straight in the eyes. Is the baby mine, Rachel? The silence that followed was the longest in my life. I don't know, she finally said. 3 words. 3 words that took a wrecking ball to everything. Not yes. Not no. I don't know. Which meant there was a chance. Which meant she'd been with both of us during the same window. Which meant every moment of joy I'd felt about that pregnancy was built on a lie. Caleb's face went blank. The kind of blank that happens when a kid's brain is trying to protect itself from processing too much pain at once. Then he looked at Rachel and said something that shattered me. Did you ever actually love us, Mom? Or were we just your backup plan until something better came along? Rachel broke down completely. She sank onto the couch, sobbing. Derek stood behind her looking uncomfortable for the first time, like he'd finally realized this wasn't a negotiation. It was a demolition. Caleb, I said gently, go upstairs. Pack an overnight bag. You're staying at Grandpa and Grandma's tonight. But Dad, go, buddy. I'll be up in 10 minutes. He went. Slowly, looking back at me twice, making sure I wasn't going to disappear the way people in his life had a habit of doing. When I heard his door close, I turned to Rachel. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get a paternity test. You're going to give me full transparency on every dollar you've spent, every message you've sent, and every lie you've told in the last 6 months. And you're going to do it through a lawyer, because I'm done having this conversation in our living room. Marcus, please don't do this. We can work through this. You can't work through something when one person has been dismantling it from the inside. I looked at Derek. And you. If you want a relationship with Caleb, you'll go through proper legal channels. But I promise you this, that boy will never be forced to choose between us. He already knows who showed up for him. Derek straightened his tie. Marcus, you're a good man. But the reality is, I can offer Caleb things you simply can't. You're right. You can offer him money. I can offer him a father. We'll let the courts decide which one matters more. After they left, I went upstairs and found Caleb sitting on his bed with his overnight bag already packed, tears running silently down his face. Hey, I said, sitting down next to him. Is she going to leave us, Dad? I couldn't lie to him. This kid had been lied to enough. I don't know. But no matter what happens with your mom, nothing changes between you and me. You understand? What if the court says I have to go with him? Then I'll fight it with everything I have. But Caleb, you're 13, in Tennessee. A judge will listen to what you want. Your voice matters. He leaned into me, and I put my arm around him. We sat there in his room, surrounded by his basketball posters and his school books and the model airplane we built together last summer. and we didn't say anything for a long time. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in silence. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life. I hired a lawyer named Diane Carpenter, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd handled custody cases in Williamson County for 2 decades. She didn't sugarcoat anything. "Marcus, you're not Caleb's biological father. You haven't formally adopted him. That puts you at a disadvantage legally, but not an insurmountable one. Tennessee courts prioritize the best interest of the child, and you've been this boy's primary father figure for 7 years." I also hired a private investigator, a retired Nashville PD detective named Gary Sessions. I told him I needed to understand exactly who Derek Hollis was behind the Audi and the Rolex. What Gary found turned my stomach. Derek's real estate development company was under investigation by the Arizona Attorney General for fraudulent property flipping. He'd been buying distressed homes, doing cosmetic renovations that masked serious structural problems, and selling them to first-time buyers at inflated prices. 3 lawsuits were pending. His business partner had already cooperated with investigators. "This guy isn't just a deadbeat dad," Gary told me over coffee at a diner off Highway 96. "He's a con artist, and my guess is he's trying to relocate to Tennessee because things are getting hot in Arizona." It got worse. Rachel had withdrawn $12,000 from our joint savings over the past 4 months. Small amounts, $200 here, $500 there, all transferred to a Venmo account linked to Derek's phone number. She'd been funding his relocation with my money. The paternity test results came back on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my truck in the school parking lot after practice when Diane called. I could tell by her voice. "It's not yours, Marcus." I sat there for a long time after she hung up. I watched my players walking to their cars, laughing, shoving each other, living in that beautiful oblivion of being 17. I thought about the nursery Rachel and I had started painting, the crib my father had built by hand, the name we'd picked out together. Then I drove home and started making plans. The custody hearing was held in the Williamson County Courthouse on a cold Tuesday in January. Rachel sat with her own attorney. Derek was there too in another expensive suit, his lawyer a slick guy from Nashville who charged $400 an hour. My lawyer was better. Diane Carpenter presented everything methodically. 7 years of school records showing me as Caleb's emergency contact, as the parent attending conferences, as the man who signed permission slips and drove on field trips. Testimony from Caleb's teachers, his basketball coach, his pediatrician, all describing me as his father in every practical sense. Bank records showing the financial fraud. Gary's findings on Derek's legal troubles in Arizona. Derek's lawyer tried to argue biological rights. Diane shut it down by pointing out that Derek had voluntarily abandoned his parental role for 9 years, and that his current legal problems made him an unsuitable custodial parent. Then Caleb took the stand. I told him he didn't have to testify. I'd told him the judge could review a written statement instead. But he insisted. "I want to say it myself, Dad. I want the judge to hear it from me." He sat in that witness chair, this lanky 13-year-old in a button-down shirt, and he spoke clearly and calmly. He talked about the years without Derek, the birthdays that passed without a call, the Father's Day cards he made in school that he had no one to give to. He talked about the day I showed up at his mother's parent-teacher conference and actually listened when she talked about his grades. He talked about the treehouse, the football games, the Sunday dinners. When the judge asked him who he wanted to live with, Caleb didn't hesitate. "My dad, Marcus Webb. He's the only real father I've ever had." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I would not cry in that courtroom. Not yet. The judge, a silver-haired man named Judge Patterson who'd clearly seen 1,000 of these cases, studied Derek for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Hollis, this court has reviewed extensive evidence of your prolonged absence from your son's life, your current legal difficulties in Arizona, and your failure to maintain any meaningful parental relationship over the past 9 years. Biological parentage alone does not confer custodial rights, particularly when those rights have been effectively abandoned." Derek's lawyers started to object. The judge silenced him with a look. "It is the determination of this court that the best interests of the minor child are served by granting full legal and physical custody to Marcus Webb, with supervised visitation for Mr. Hollis, contingent upon resolution of his pending legal matters in Arizona and completion of a parenting evaluation. Rachel was granted visitation on alternating weekends, pending her own cooperation with the custody arrangement. She sat through the ruling looking like someone watching her own house burn from across the street. 3 months later, Derek was indicted by a grand jury in Maricopa County on 12 counts of fraud. His assets were frozen. The Audi was repossessed. The last I heard, he was living in a studio apartment in Tempe, waiting for trial. Rachel had the baby, a little girl she named Sophie. She was staying with her sister in Murfreesboro, working part-time at a dental office, trying to rebuild a life from the wreckage of her choices. Caleb asked about Sophie once. "Is she my sister?" he said one evening while we were grilling burgers in the backyard. "She's your half-sister, yes. Same mom." He flipped a burger with careful concentration. "Maybe I'll meet her someday, when I'm older, when things are less messy." "That's your call, buddy. Always your call." The adoption was finalized on a warm Friday in April. The courthouse was quiet. My parents were there. My brother drove down from Memphis. Caleb wore the same suit from the custody hearing, but he'd grown 2 inches since then, and the sleeves were too short. When the judge signed the papers making Caleb Marcus Webb legally and permanently my son, Caleb looked up at me and grinned. "Stuck with you forever, right?" That was the deal. That evening we sat on the back porch, eating leftover burgers and watching the sun go down behind the hills. The treehouse I'd built stood in the corner of the yard, its wood weathered now, the rope ladder fraying. Caleb was getting too old for it, but neither of us could bring ourselves to take it down. "Dad," he said. "Yeah, thank you for not giving up on me." I looked at this kid, my kid, this boy who'd been left behind and let down by people who were supposed to protect him, and I thought about all the fathers out there who think fatherhood is about blood. It's not. It's about showing up on the bad days. It's about staying when leaving would be easier. It's about fighting for someone who can't fight for themselves, and doing it so fiercely that they never doubt for a single second that they matter. Caleb, I didn't fight for you. I fought with you. We're a team. The best team, the only team that matters. The sky turned orange and purple over Franklin, and somewhere in the distance I could hear a neighbor's kid bouncing a basketball on asphalt. The sound of ordinary life. The sound of home. I used to think that what Rachel did destroyed me. But sitting on that porch with my son, I realized the truth. She didn't destroy me. She revealed me. She showed me exactly what kind of man I am when everything falls apart. And it turns out, I'm the kind of man who stays. That's enough. That's everything.